Okay, busy Tuesday at the start of the NFL Combine, and no better place to start than where the Browns made me very wrong. At the end of the last podcast, I thought, oh, maybe the Browns will treat John Johnson III kind of like they treated Prefer. They'll see what's out there, and if they can upgrade him, they'll upgrade him. If they can't, they'll hold on to him. And no, they went the Joe Woods route and said, no, get out, announcing that they are going to release him. I suppose there's an outside chance where somebody could come in and go, hey, we'll give you something so we make sure we get John Johnson. I don't think that's likely to happen. But anyway, the Browns opened up the combine essentially by announcing, hey, we need to get a free safety. So yeah, that's sort of the tip of the iceberg, I suppose, in news this week. It's been a busy week. Bree, how are we feeling?
Well, Pete, I feel like the Browns are doing these moves and making these decisions in alignment with our podcast, which I very much appreciate the fact that we always have something new to talk about.
Well, this is the nefarious plot of the NFL to make the NFL a 12-month league.
I get it.
Which is good for you and me. But it's always helpful that Andrew Berry shows up to our production meetings anyway, so he gives us the lay of the land on these type of things. But
right, he gives us a heads up always when news is about to break.
Now, one of the things that we don't want to get lost in is it was announced that Jimmy Haslam and the Haslam group has purchased some percentage of the Milwaukee Bucks. I've seen 25%. I'm not really sure what it is, but the reason this is important is because it coincided with the next day going, or even maybe in the same day, of going, hey, by the way, we're raising ticket prices again. So it's like, hey, it's almost like the Browns are buying 25% of the Bucks too. This is not unusual. The Browns, I believe, I've been told raised ticket prices last year, but it feels like they do it
every year
consistently. And my immediate reaction to this is always like, curious to see where this whole thing's going when I see the Phoenix Suns get sold for $4 billion, or I see the Denver Broncos get for $4.6 billion, and I see the Milwaukee Bucks valued at $3.5 billion. And you see these people throw it around, and to you and to me, it's like monopoly money. But the harsh reality is, if they're spending all this money, they're going to get it somehow. And ultimately, fans are going to pay some of it. It's just how it's going to be. And it's very easy to then turn around and go, hey, by the way, you need to pay, $5 in some cases or up. I love how it was phrased, less than 10 in certain sections. So that's a really interesting aspect of this. People are already feeling the pinch of like inflation and everything. And part of me feels like, hey, everything else is going up. Why don't we just jack prices up because we can? And then there's the other part of this of, hey, we just are spending potentially $875 million on this other franchise. We've got to start making that money up somewhere. And obviously ticket prices aren't going to fix everything, but nevertheless, it's a real thing for people. And, how much of it is hot air, but anytime you mention it, there's always fans that like react to tweets or whatever and go, listen, I'm at my wit's end with this thing. It's expensive and they're not winning, or not going where we want them to go. Like, I don't know how much longer I could do this. So I get it. It's not easy. And I don't, I've never told anybody you should pay money for the Browns. It's entirely up to you what you want to do.
I have a couple of thoughts. The first, when the news had come out about the Haslams buying the shares in the Bucks, and Pete texted me this yesterday when the news broke. We're recording this on a Tuesday, so it was Monday. With the amount of money, my only response was, the Haslams are so rich, it's sickening. To just have that amount of money be spent it's unfathomable. I mean, I don't even know how to compare that in just normal everyday life. And it just is another reminder, though, of how far off or how disconnected they are from reality. The fans that are spending the money on season tickets, I hate to say this, but I'll say it. Like, season tickets are an investment for a lot of people. It's not chump change to be able to buy season tickets. It doesn't matter if you're in the nosebleeds per se, they are still a lot. It's a lot of money. I mean, you're talking about thousands of dollars if you're buying more than one seat because you're paying for 9 or 10 games, depending on the year. And to be frank, Pete, as a season ticket holder, just to give you some insight, we bought our season tickets for the 2019 season. So coming off of Baker Mayfield's rookie year, we were feeling great about ourselves, really high on the Browns' future and the state of the future of this organization.
And we felt good back then.
Probably the worst investment I've ever made in terms of not getting anything out of it. I have not been able to sell a ticket at face value since we bought season tickets in 2019.
Yeah.
We did not buy the tickets to go into it with, we're going to make our money back and or make a profit, right? Like, if you're going to buy season tickets, you can't really have that mentality because you have no idea what's going to happen. It's not a money-making business per se. However, there are instances or cases where we aren't able to attend a game and we just want to get a portion of our money back or at least have fans in the seat so that someone's getting enjoyment out of it. And we haven't even really been able to do that. But what I will say about the whole ticket prices being raised, we were impacted based on where our seats are located. I'm at the point now where we probably went to 4 games last year. The year prior, I don't know, maybe around the same 4 or 5. Like, I don't know, we're about 50% in attendance for our own season tickets. And I'm at the point where we probably should not have season tickets because we just don't go enough. We don't live in Cleveland. So it's not like it's just a quick ride down to the stadium. We have to be planful. We have to find a sitter for our kids. We have to commute an hour and 20 minutes there. And then,
which, by the way, let's be honest, only adds to the toll.
Exactly.
You're not doing that for free either. You are now paying to then use the thing you already paid for.
And then paying for the parking, the walk to the stadium, the concessions, all of that. I mean, it's an expensive day. And so I'm sitting here thinking, like, gosh, we should probably consider just not getting them. I enjoy watching football on TV just as much as in person.
TV is good.
Pete, like, now I'm so, like, it's a competitive thing for me now because there's 8,000 people on the waiting list. And I'm like, oh gosh, I can't give up the season tickets because like they're sought after. Like now they're highly sought after.
But that's so deliberate. That's 100% deliberate though.
I hate that. I hate that I'm that type of person though, that even like becomes part of the equation.
Sure. No, I mean, every team that has a waiting list, they use that to do that.
Oh my gosh, it drives me crazy.
They do. They give you that sort of inherent fear of, oh, I can't now give up these tickets because I don't know if I'll ever get them back. And what if they do become good? And now I want to go to all the games. And now I can't. Like, and it's a weird thing. It's a trap that sort of gets you going. And
we only have 2. And I shouldn't say only. We have 2. But it's not like we can take our family. Like it's not like we would have to buy 2 extra tickets in order for our kids to come along eventually. And so, it's really just 2 people can go. And the other big thing, I don't know if you saw this, but the gift this year was the other big talking point. Did you see what the gift is this year?
I saw it's coats, right? You get to pick of one of 3.
It's a jacket.
A jacket thing?
But it's only one, Pete. Like we only get one jacket for the pair of tickets. So I was like, okay, well, I guess since it's in my name, the account's in my name, I guess I'll order the jacket and my husband just won't get a jacket. So yes, I was like, for the record, Pete, my job, my real life job, I buy jackets for a living to sell them in stores.
Uh-oh.
This is the most expensive jacket I have ever purchased in my life. If you want to equate the value of what I'm paying for the tickets in order to get this jacket.
It's not unlike, getting if you're, I've never done this, but I know a number of people who have done the like Winking Lizard beer tour. And you have this 100 or whatever beers to get whatever sort of crappy, sort of whatever little coat they have. Now I do know somebody, or I knew somebody who did that, one of those, but it was for like tequila and it became like thousands of dollars for one of these things. So yeah, it's crazy. But the thing that immediately makes me think of, and I've thought this anyway, I do not want to hear from ownership to come to, whether it's the city of Cleveland or Cuyahoga County, because all this talk about they want a stadium, and I get it. Don't ask one of the poorest cities in the country to now fund you this stadium when you can drop $1 billion
Yes.
on the Milwaukee Bucks. Like, and there are plenty of teams that have owners that own their stadium outright in very wealthy areas. New York Jets, or whoever owns the New York Stadium, owns it, the property and everything. SoFi, privately owned in Los Angeles. The Gillette Stadium is privately owned. The city of Cleveland, wherever they want to build the stadium, and there's some other things that I guess could theoretically come into play with in terms of like land around it and potentially improving that. I'm at least willing to listen to that conversation about, what that would involve, but sell them the land. They can build whatever they want. If it has a retractable dome or whatever, great. And they can then profit 100% off of any other events they want to put in there. They want to
There you go.
wrestling in there. They want to put in
Harry Styles, Taylor Swift.
If they want to put motocross in there, whatever it is, or, if they can finagle it so they can host a big event like, the Super Bowl or whatever, people will immediately go, well, they'll never have it in Cleveland. Well, maybe they won't, but they're not going to the way it is right now. But I don't want to hear about, coming to, like, Jimmy Haslam could effectively buy Cleveland at this point and just be like, no, get out. This is mine now. Don't then come and go, I need help. Like, I just don't want to hear. That's the one part I can't.
Yeah, the optics are tough. Optics are challenging.
Yeah. So and look, and maybe he won't, and maybe he'll just like, no, I'm going to do this, and I want to do this in part, and he can sell it at that point and be like, no, I'm invested. I want to do this. I want to build my own thing. I don't want, to put it on you. This is sort of me giving back in the sense, even though it's his own stadium, but you could at least say at that point, I'm doing this myself. I'm not asking you to sort of do it. That would be, I think he would actually win over a lot of people for that, even though he is, so ridiculously wealthy. It's not like, that big of a loss. But anyway, that's the only part that I get that. So when it comes to the stadium, I just don't want to hear about, and I don't even live in Cuyahoga County. It's not, and you don't either. So it's not like it's going to affect us, but it's stupid to like ask these poor people who can't go to the games to pay for it. And I don't care if it's a sin tax or anything else. Just don't. Anyway, that's all of that stuff out of the way. Anyway, as far as John Johnson's going to be released or maybe traded, most likely released. So the immediate reaction is, well, who are they going to get? And one of the people that's been dropped, Mary Kay Cabot mentioned Jesse Bates. She's certainly not the first person to mention Jesse Bates. And part of the reason you can mention Jesse Bates is because Jesse Bates and Deshaun Watson have the same agent. David Muguleta or whatever his name is, has 42 clients. Jesse Bates is certainly one of them. And I would think whether the Browns are actually going to get Jesse Bates or not, this is one of those areas where Deshaun Watson gets you a meeting.
Yep.
Now, there are any number of people projecting Jesse Bates to end up in Atlanta. Maybe he will. I don't know. But here again, in this case, it's entirely a business relationship thing. But as I've said, I think you're going to be surprised at some of the doors that having Deshaun Watson will open for the Browns in terms of who they can talk to. I don't have a high belief that they're going to get Jesse Bates, but the one thing that the Browns are signaling with this is they are confident they are going to get somebody to more than adequately fill that spot enough that they could say, we're going to save the $9.75 million with John Johnson and move on.
Yeah, I don't think this is a surprise, really. Kind of felt like the rating was on the wall with him, just in terms of his overall production not really being up to his contract, quite frankly. But I will say, Pete, upon hearing this news, I'm trying to stay calm, trying not to overreact, but I am panicking a little bit because I do feel like we have a lot of holes to fill. particularly on the defensive side of the ball. And I'm just like, yeah, I'm just starting to worry a little bit about, I don't want to have a Band-Aid again. I don't, I feel like at this point with Deshaun Watson playing for the full season, the offense and the pieces that were built around him, I feel pretty good about it. Of course, like there are definitely some question marks at some positions on offense, but for the most part, you feel pretty good from an overall who's starting and even the depth behind the starters. When I go to the defensive side of the ball, I'm just feeling very uncomfortable. And it's nerve-wracking because there's a lot of holes to fill in terms of starting positions. But I told you, I don't know, when we recorded the podcast a month or so ago, that I'm not confident in the depth behind the starters. So I hope Andrew Berry is a wizard over these next couple of months and we start to get some answers as to what is going to happen. Not saying that I want to keep John Johnson just to have a body to fill a hole, but I really hope they're starting to figure out the puzzle pieces and how they're going to all piece together on defense.
So you think replacing 5 starters on defense is a lot? I agree. That is a lot. Five starters is a lot. Now,
should I be panicked? Should I not be? Why are you so calm, Pete?
Just in sort of doing the homework on what's going to be sort of available, and it, the answer is always because I think I know what's going to happen and I'm going to be wrong, but I think I know how they're going to sort of approach this. One of those holes may fill itself real quick. So the 5 holes, 3 starting defensive linemen, that's a big deal. Those are big holes. We are in crater form, Pete. That's a big deal. Now, and we've talked about this. I actually feel better about the depth than you do because they drafted a bunch of those guys.
I know you do. I'm still not sold.
Well, I mean, it's not like you can point to last season and point to all the sacks that Alex Wright had because he didn't have any.
Exactly.
But no, I mean, like, I look at Alex Wright, I look at Perrion Winfrey, and I say you could hold up a giant glowing sign that says this is a monster opportunity for Perrion Winfrey. Jim Schwartz is like the dream hire for this man, as long as he doesn't screw it up. If he really buys in and sort of grows up, this could be wonderful for him. And then Isaiah Thomas got more out of him last year than I thought we would. So those are 3 guys you go, those are going to be depth pieces at the very least. But nevertheless, 3 starters is no joke. Now, one of the other holes is middle linebacker. I continue to believe that the Browns will ultimately just re-sign Anthony Walker Jr. Everything with him is just a question, at least to me, the question is he healthy? That was a very strange injury he suffered to his leg. I'm not going to pretend I know how that recovery goes. He made it very clear he would like to stay here. The Browns loved him as a locker room presence, so much so that it was clearly a problem when they lost him. Hopefully they aren't in that situation where they're now depending on him to essentially be the defensive dad where he has to take care of everything. But that's the easy way. Now, the good news with that is off-ball linebacker, especially middle linebacker, there are a ton of really good options. I love Levante David. To me, he's a Hall of Famer. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are tearing it down. He's a free agent. He's older, but he's yet to drop off even a little bit. I don't think it's realistic that he will come here, but he's probably going to go somewhere else unless he just decides, no, I was a Buck for life. I'm going to retire. And then the Rams cut Bobby Wagner. It's the same. Those 2 teams are tearing it down. So those guys are genuine stars at the position. Now, do the Browns want to pay for that? I don't know where the rubber meets the road. Again, that's why I sort of default to Anthony Walker. He was very, very good until he got hurt 3 weeks into the season. So, and then the other one is obviously free safety. Here again, Jesse Bates is a stud. He's very, very good. I don't believe the Browns are going to end up with him. Now, if they do, it will not be like, ooh, how did they pull that off? Again, those business relationships matter, and it could be very appealing to Jesse Bates to come here. He's one where I have no feel on him because he's from Indiana. He went to Wake Forest. I don't know where like when you hear Atlanta Falcons, you're like, oh, this must be like near where he's from. There's no indication of that. So who knows? He may be like, hey, Cleveland's close enough to home that I can drive there if he's like really attached to that. Again, I don't know. So it's sort of like what's important to Jesse Bates other than money. I'm not sure. So you get down to like Juan Thornhill, who I loved coming out of 2018. I wanted to draft him instead of Greedy Williams. Score one for me. Sorry, John Dorsey. But everybody likes Juan Thornhill. So, and like you see PFF's projection, you're like 2 years, like $11 million total, and like 30 teams worth of media and fans are like, I want Juan Thornhill, which makes me think, oh, well, he's probably going to get more than that. And also he's got a million choices. Cleveland may be more difficult. So my next guy at that point is Deshaun Harmon. He's a journeyman guy, but he's like 30. He is the Band-Aid, which you don't really love, but he was very good this past year with the Raiders on a really bad defense. He may not want to go back there. He's played for, I think, 5 teams, including Detroit. So he's been all over the place. So that may be a guy where, again, to me, I wonder if, I keep harping on this. Find more Jacoby Brissett's. Don't go get Jadeveon Clowney's. Deshaun Harmon, incidentally, was a Patriot. But he may be a guy who's going to come in and do his job, and you're sort of happy with what you get. You may get a little bit more out of that. But to your question of like, why do I feel comfortable with this? I think that's sort of the thought process they're going to have. They're going to sign Jacoby Brissett type players that aren't going to be like big ticket items. I know people want to trade for DeForest Buckner. I think DeForest Buckner is phenomenal. I remember that draft when he came out, and I came up with some weird ass trade down, trade up scenario to get him until the Jaguars screwed the whole thing up. In any case, I don't know how realistic that is, but there are a lot of guys that I look around and go, they could be really good for us as sort of that, 1 year, 2 year guy. As an example, Ashawn Robinson is a nose tackle. He's a professional. Again, he's another guy where he's projected. Deshaun Harmon was projected to like get a little over $1 million. Like, okay. Again, it's hard to know how accurate that's going to be, but it's the same with Ashawn Robinson, who's a 330-pound nose tackle who's projected to get around like $2 million. And all he does is clog up holes and stuff the run. Perfect. And he's on the Rams, who seemingly are going to want to move on. But there's a bunch of guys in that sort of mix that I think the Browns can cobble together, guys that people are going to be like, who is this guy? But you get enough of them, and they're just professional guys who are focused on a goal, want to be here for the right reasons. And I think if you do that, they're going to be okay. Now, I say all that, they have to go and do it. And we get back to your point. 5 holes is no joke. So you have to make it right. But I continue to believe that that they have enough star power within the guys that they've sort of developed and drafted themselves. You look at the defense, and the guys who are there are all guys that the Browns drafted. They've been really, they've signed some guys with some success, but it's Myles Garrett, they drafted him. Denzel Ward, they drafted him. Greg Newsome, Martin Emerson, Grant Delpit. Those are like your dudes. They're all guys they brought in themselves. So they don't necessarily need to get like stars as much as it would be nice to get a bunch of dudes up front that can go kill the quarterback. They just need professional guys, and they can keep drafting and hopefully find success that route is where I think that will go. So yeah, I would describe it as cautiously optimistic because I think the plan to get it done is reasonable. It's not, I'm not out here trying to go, well, if they can convince Jesse Bates to come here and then they trade for DeForest Buckner and then they sign Javon Hargrave, they get 3 of these great players all at once, that everything's going to be great. That's not realistic, but I think what they can do is achievable and will make a big, big, big difference.
So even after you said all of that, I still can't help but get like 2020 vibes, where we had just a bunch of players on 1-year deals and kind of like the plug and play guys, where that whole season and then even going into the playoffs felt like we were just a couple of pieces away from being a really good defense. And then it was like, oh, well, we went and solved those problems by upgrading some players on defense or having continuity with some of the players that were either drafted but I don't know, Pete. Like, that's where I'm still just kind of questioning everything, because I feel like it could take me right back to that season specifically where there were a lot of question marks, more questions than we had answers to. And I don't know. I think this is a big task for the staff to be able to not only fill the holes, but with players that are right for this system, obviously having a new defensive coordinator in the mix and the changeover there, but being able to execute and buy in and being able to click right away. I mean, we talked about this a lot last week. Like, I just don't want this team to start slow. Like, they just don't have the luxury of starting slow. And I think we've seen that for the last 3 years, and I don't think this year would be any different. Now, you could argue that the offense should be able to maybe keep the defense afloat a little bit. But again, I don't want to rely on that either. So I don't know. I have a lot of question marks. You are cautiously optimistic. I don't know what I want to say, aggressively pessimistic. And I am, yes, anxious is a great way to describe it. Just anxious. I feel unsettled.
Well, you referenced 2020, and that's an interesting way to frame it. What do you want to see from this season? Like, even from here, we don't know what they're going to do. But if you were to look at it from right here, what would you say from right now? We're in, this time next year.
Yeah.
It's February 28th. What would a successful season look like?
A winning record and being a playoff team.
But they did that. And that's why I asked, because you referenced 2020. They did both those things.
Yes, understood. But I feel like it still wasn't, like, we still were like questioning if we had all of the right pieces and parts.
Oh, we did not have all the right pieces and parts.
I know. And you could argue that was obviously happening on the offensive side as well.
I mean, Kadarius Hodge was a major fixture. And if I go on the street and ask people,
I like Kadarius Hodge, so that's really
that's fine. But like this, and this is how funny when I hear, because like you talk about the offense and you sound like a rational person who goes, they have a lot of good players, they should be good, and yet I hear people talk about this offense. I don't know if we need a whole new bunch of receivers.
Yeah, people we want to trade Nick Chubb so that we want to subtract from the roster to add like question marks.
Yes, so like, and that's the thing is like, people are like freaking out about wide receiver 3 and all this, and I go back to 2020 and I go, Jarvis Landry, Rashard Higgins, Kadarius Hodge were our receivers, and
Baker Mayfield.
And Baker Mayfield was the quarterback. And that year, the Browns scored 400 points, which is like, which works out to 25 points per game. That's like the benchmark to guarantee yourself a playoff season. Like, if you have, and the Browns have not done that since 1964.
Well, and I think too, 2020 was a bit of an anomaly season overall, because we talked about too, like, it was the COVID season. So you didn't have, like, you were under protocol for most of the season, which feels funny that feels like forever ago. There weren't fans in stadiums for the most part. The whole city was on lockdown. Players had nothing else to do other than to go to practice and go home. I mean, it's just wild to think about that right now with how that season played out and all the things that happened versus going even into the next year, where it felt like we should have been building off of that. And it was completely different, riddled by a lot of different things.
See,
but
I love it because you take the exact opposite viewpoint as all the people who are insane about this. And they go, oh, 2020 was a fluke because there were no fans in the stands, so coaching was easier, as opposed to the very reasonable point of going, players couldn't go and do anything else.
They couldn't do anything else. Like, all they had to do was go to practice. Like, think about it. Like, the entire world shut down for the most part. People that were not in healthcare or critical roles, everyone was working from home. Like, think about it being an NFL player. Like, you got to leave your house to go to practice. Like, sure, you were wearing masks and things were a lot different, and there were a lot of virtual meetings that would otherwise have been in person, but you got to actually leave and travel still. Like, if I were those players, I would have been like, okay, I'm going to invest all of my time in doing this and then following the protocols because I want to be able to get out of my house and travel and go to other places when the rest of the country isn't able to do that.
It's interesting because as you say that, I start to think about some players who had some success in 2020 and players who have not has had much success since 2020. And you start to go, I wonder how much those two things are related. And to the jump right out to you, obviously injury played a major role, but Baker Mayfield being one, and then Kareem Hunt being another one of just two examples. You can go, hey, they were really good in 2020. I wonder how much of that was they had no other choice versus, things just sort of clicked. So that's just interesting. You frame it like that. Now, as far as what we heard today, this did not happen in the main presser. And it's always really interesting how they do this. They have, in this case, Andrew Berry did his podium setup. He's there for 15 minutes. And then he goes off and then does another side thing with just local media or whoever's around for another 5. And it seems like those are more interesting questions, in which one of the things he answered was, first, he was not willing to say who the starting center was going to be. And then he elaborated when he was asked later, it said he's going to meet with Ethan Posich and his agent, or I should say just his agents this week. This is not uncommon. This is a lot of what happens at the combine is all these agents are here. So it's very easy to sort of get a lot of that stuff worked out. So the Browns may find out real quick what is realistic with Posich. I'm still of the belief that it's unlikely that he's back, but that is another thing that's sort of out there. If they're going to go with Nick Harris or some other direction. But that's one more thing that's sort of been thrown out there. One other note that was sort of thrown out there: they're not surprising at all. They're not bringing in kicker competition. I don't know who thought they were, but nevertheless. And then the other thing that sort of, they asked some questions that were sort of like the obvious. They alluded to the fact that, that they're going to restructure contracts to make money. Well, really, I'm shocked by that. The one thing that sort of was interesting to me, he got asked randomly about Catherine Raish, and he gave a glowing answer about Catherine Raish, who, her resume is unbelievable. She's just ridiculously talented, period. But we've never seen her in the way that we have other people. And I'm curious if
she's never had a press conference, right?
No, they never did. And I get it.
Yeah.
As much as I thought that would have been interesting is because they had to know that
she would have just been peppered with questions all about Deshaun Watson and her thoughts and feelings because she's a woman, essentially.
Yes. And who knows? Maybe she would have defaulted, to French and been like, man, I can't speak English. But I would love for her to do that because if you've researched her career, I know I did and Abby Mueller did, she's just genuinely ridiculously. She's one, a lot like Bree. She's one of those people who's just good at everything and could be dropped into something and be good at it. She's got that kind of talent, and Barry's no, she can scout, she can do contracts, she can do everything. Which I thought was interesting. But other than that,
I liked when they asked a question about Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, they tried to get him to say if the Browns were actively screwing all the other franchises by signing Deshaun Watson to this contract. And the answer to that is no. But Jack Duffin is smart and in contracts, again, despite the fact he's British. And he's picked up on spite too, in that he's pointed out that the Browns aren't going to restructure Watson's contract until Lamar Jackson gets tagged, because that tag value will be higher if the Browns don't restructure it first, because it will be such a higher value. It'll be at that $54 million value as opposed to defaulting to the next guy, which
I love. Just a little bit of pettiness, just
agreed.
Love that.
Yes. But yeah, other than that, there wasn't much there. I'm curious to see if Stefanski's will be different.
And is Stefanski speaking?
I'm not sure. For some reason, I thought it was also today. I thought they were back to back. and they're not. There's been plenty of other stuff to go on. Coaching news. We talked about it last week. We thought it was going to happen. Bubba Ventrone was indeed hired, which he was given the assistant head coaching title, which I don't think is shocking, but nobody had really covered it, which made it very easy to make the hire because at that point it's a promotion. If he wanted to leave, they had no way. And what we found out, which is not surprising, and it's probably one of the most relatable things that could possibly happen to anyone who's worked at most any job, is Ventrone, basically through back channels, reports got out that Ventrone was pissed that Jim Irsay hired Jeff Saturday to be the interim head coach. He wanted that job. And he, like a lot of people who are probably in that organization, was unhappy that they sort of just brought in this guy and expected them to keep working. And like, you don't have to work in an office. You could work at any job, but there's one of those things where you're like, the person on the ground has more common sense of like what's really going. And everybody probably has some story they can default to where they can think of like their boss doing something completely stupid, that makes no sense, and being like, screw this, I'm going to get the hell out of here, and go work somewhere else.
Yes. When that came out, I was like 100%. I could totally relate to this entire situation.
So look, the Browns are pumped with Ventrone hiring if you go by DVOA, Rick Gosselin's the one I usually go to, who does his special teams ranking. The past 3 years, the Colts have been in the top 10. The Browns, I was surprised, finished, I think, 14th according to DVOA. And then
didn't your guy get released from special teams?
Who's that?
I forget his name. Starts with a K.
Oh, you're talking about the linebacker?
Yeah, he was a good special teams there, remember?
Yes, he did. I'm curious to see if he comes back.
That's what I was thinking. I was kind of surprised by that.
Dude from Cal, whose name?
Cruz.
Oh, Kanazik.
Kanazik, thank you.
And I'm sure, and I know I said it's Kunashik. That's right, because his wife told me the right pronunciation.
Proper pronunciation.
But yes, I'm curious. I was surprised by that. I wonder if that was sort of a, giving him the opportunity to go see if he could go, test his market value or whatever. But he's one where I'm curious to see if he comes back, because he was good at that stuff. And the other thing we don't know is the true nature of his injury. That ended up having him go down for the season. It's one of those, especially with those sort of lower tier guys that were sort of became bigger fixtures as the season went on. Like Reggie Ragland got hurt. We never got really an answer as to why he, what the nature of his shoulder injury was. He's another guy that would be interesting to sort of bring back. If he could provide some depth and maybe give you another guy who could potentially give you just a pure run stopping force. But so the Browns, just from a lot of this depends on your roster management and how much you prioritize special teams. But look, you have to go back 4 years to when Prefer's year with Kitchens, where his special teams ranked higher than Ventrone's. Since that year, Ventrone's been top of the line. So I don't know if the Browns are automatically be in the top 10, but you'd like to think they're in better hands at the very least. Certainly, if you had concerns coming out with Cade York this past year, understandably, especially with the right hash where he kept pulling everything, maybe they'll bind to my idea of sending him to the Southern Hemisphere to kick in the mountains or something. But you'd like to think that he would be able to get Cade York right. Clearly, the team believes in him. Understandably, he's got a ton of talent. It's just a matter of figuring it out. The other hire that stands out to me, they made a bunch of sort of moves that are interesting. And to be clear, normally the combine is sort of like this unofficial deadline to hire your coaching staff. But even the way the Browns phrased it in the way they released it, they called it just a coaching update. I don't think they're done. And part of the reason I don't think they're done, in addition to that wording, is like Kelly Bronson was moved to assistant wide receivers coach. Now, last year she was assistant wide receivers coach and chief of staff. Why does it stand out? The Browns don't currently have a chief of staff. I assume they're going to have one at some point. So that's part of the reason I don't think they're done. But there's also some rumors of what could happen with Denard Wilson, who's been working with the Eagles, because the Eagles just hired Sean Desai to be their defensive coordinator, and the weird webs that are being weaved from that standpoint. Denard Wilson was a candidate for the Browns defensive coordinator job. Jared Mueller from Dogs by Nature is where he's at now. He suggested that potentially with Desai getting that job, that Denard Wilson may end up with the Browns in some capacity, which would obviously be a big deal for them. He's a defensive backs focused guy, even though the Browns have a safeties coach and a corners coach now, a guy they promoted from within. So that's something to keep an eye on. I'll be curious to see if Denard Wilson actually leaves. If he does, great. But the one hire that did stand out to me, we were curious to see what the Browns would do with quarterbacks coach. And ultimately, they decided to go with Alex Van Pelt. And they hired Bill Musgrave to be the senior offensive assistant. And they had one before who they promoted to like one of the most nefarious sounding things, like, in charge of special projects. I don't know what that means, but it sounds really neat. It would look great on a business card. But Bill Musgrave is really interesting because you can't get to Berea without going through Minneapolis. It doesn't work that way. And they, of course, Stefanski coached with Musgrave. In fact, Musgrave was the offensive coordinator when Stefanski started in Minnesota. But it's been 10 years since they've coached together. So Bill Musgrave has gone a lot of places. Now, let's just start with the Van Pelt element. After hearing the Deshaun Watson interview with Quincy Avery, it made a lot of sense to me that they went that route. Why? Because Deshaun Watson specifically said, I don't really care who they hire, other than he wanted somebody who's a teacher at quarterbacks coach, because I trust Kevin Stefanski. In his words, I trust Kevin Stefanski and Alex Van Pelt. Seemed really easy to just say, okay, Alex Van Pelt can be the quarterbacks coach. He's still the offensive coordinator. And it sounds like Musgrave is going to take some of that off of his plate so that, the quarterbacks obviously get enough work. It's interesting from the standpoint, the Browns have a ridiculous pipeline of coaches who coach quarterbacks. So, and Musgrave, in addition to being an offensive coordinator, the Browns now have 5 offensive coordinators or people who have been offensive coordinators in the NFL on their offensive staff. Musgrave, Van Pelt, Chad O'Shea, Stefanski, and Bill Callahan all have been offensive coordinator in the NFL at some point, which to me is very useful as long as, you don't get that too many chefs trying to run this thing. But so far they've been good on that. But even the Drew Petzing, who is quarterbacks coach, who took the Arizona Cardinals job, hired Israel Woolfolk from the Browns, who was in the pipeline teaching quarterbacks and is now the Arizona Cardinals quarterbacks coach. And then there's one other guy in the organization whose name escapes me right now, who is also in the pipeline to coach quarterbacks, which is just really interesting to me that all of this happened. But I'm curious your thoughts on that, because you listened to that interview as well, with the choice of Van Pelt.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I took away from that whole situation was Deshaun Watson in that interview seems to have full trust in the coaching staff, and specifically said, I guess agreed with Quincy as the interviewer, that Kevin Stefanski is one of the best play callers in the league. Like Deshaun Watson was like, yeah, he is. So I feel like he reiterated a couple of times about having faith in not only Kevin Stefanski, but Andrew Berry in the hiring of the coaching staff that is surrounding him. I think we touched on this a little bit in the season when Deshaun came back as the quarterback, at the end of the season. And I do think that he seems to be like pretty humble and honest and transparent in the fact of he is okay admitting some of his shortcomings as well as wanting to get better and improve, is willing to put in the work overall. So I think that's a redeeming quality in my eyes, where he's like not gonna be someone who needs to be in control, needing to be the one that makes a decision. Like he's willing to go with, nope, I'm aligned with whatever they think is the best for this team and for me. I think that's a bit of a breath of fresh air, because it doesn't appear that he has a big ego. And that seems to be the MO of this entire staff, to be honest with you. Like there's just no room for those egos to get involved and muddy things up.
Yeah. There was a lot of interesting stuff in there, some of which got misconstrued by people who either deliberately or just ignorantly don't know any better. The thing that obviously stands out, he knows Quincy Avery for years and years and years. He knows how much Quincy knows about football, and he talks to him like he knows a lot about football. The comfort level was immediate. It was very relaxed.
Yes.
It was fun for him, and you got to sort of see him really talk in a way that, like we've talked about him in press conferences and stuff, he's pretty comfortable for the most part. Like once we got past, the stuff which we would still, isn't done yet, but and will still be there. When he just talked about football, you're like, where is this? I get it. He's very charming. He's very interesting. He's very, introspective, very positive, and all these other things, which is it made for a good interview. Now, the stuff that couldn't stop complimenting the coaching staff, and neither could Quincy Avery. It's really interesting to listen to Quincy Avery talk about this, because Quincy Avery,
he has no ties.
Well, he's also very opinionated. He's not afraid to tell you if he doesn't like people. And if you heard it on the podcast, he said it on the podcast. He goes, I keep an eye on things because I'll put people on blast. He hates Deion Sanders, for example. And in a lot of ways, I agree with him on that, in some of the stuff where he just sort of looks at him as sort of a carpetbagger. I get it. But he's not afraid. Like, he's another guy. I agree with him on this. Like, Clemson's offense, awful, just regressive in ways that holds people back and does a real disservice. Anyway, not to get too far off the beaten path here. What I found interesting was, and what got sort of pulled from this, was this quote about Quincy Avery asked a pretty interesting question, talking about contrasting what he was doing with the Houston Texans versus what he was doing with the Browns. And with the with the Houston Texans, he was in control of everything. He made all the calls. He called the protection. He called audibles. He called, the mic. He called run where the run was going to go, and all these other things. And then he goes, here, so much of that is baked in. And now the center is in charge of protection, and Kevin Stefanski and the coaching staff are taking some of that responsibility. And then he goes, in some ways it's simple. And a lot of, and then he goes and then said something along the lines of, simple is not always better. And first, people immediately jumped on this idea that, like, him saying simple meant the offense is simple. All it meant was that he doesn't have to do quite as much. And then he sort of talked about how simple isn't always better. And part of this was interesting to me because part of this is a little bit of an ego thing, but it's earned because he played at an incredibly high level with the Houston Texans in 2020. You can make whatever argument why his numbers were like among the best of the league. So having done that, if you were that good doing it all yourself, in that way, you sort of look at it sort of like a great basketball player, that you're not looking to defer to the coaching staff or other people to sort of tell you how to sort of take care of the defense. And that part of it's interesting. And I'm curious, as a current and former elite athlete, in your time as a point guard, there were probably times where you were sitting there going, I don't need anything from anyone else. I can see what's going on. I trust myself, and I know what we need to do to win or whatever it is.
I'm gonna have a hard time answering that because I hated my basketball coach,
That's why I asked. I knew that I knew what the answer was going to be.
He would be the situation of Bubba Ventrone and Jeff Saturday. Let's just put it that way. I just had zero respect for him and thought that he had no idea. Actually, I knew that he had no idea what he was doing. He had the luxury of taking over a coaching position where he already had talent on the basketball team, didn't know what he was doing, but we all knew what we were doing enough to be able to win games. So that's my 2 cents.
Yes, I knew what the answer was going to be. What do you think I asked? So the answer is yes. Like there are times when you just, even in high school, you could say like, no, I knew what needed to happen, and you trusted yourself more than him. If Deshaun Watson has done at the NFL level, I don't blame him for thinking he's not doing this in like a cocky way, but like there are going to be times where I feel like I know what the answer is, and it's probably better for me in that moment to just do it. That's, I don't have a problem with it. And I'm curious to see what the push and pull like that. It may not happen in 2023, but I'm curious by 2024, 2025, if everything stays the way it is, and this is sort of the setup they have going, does Kevin Stefanski, because Kevin Stefanski's stance has always been, I do what I do because I think it's best for the team. And if he comes to a point where he's like, no, Deshaun has this, does he now take a step back and go, no, it's yours. You can do this more and more and more, or even if it's just situationally, that will be an interesting sort of evolution to see how that goes, or even coming into this, this season here, how much more control is it going to be? But the other part of that is like, Watson's going to have to sit down with whatever centers the Browns have and whoever their starter is going to be, and like go on tape and go, figure out, make sure they're on the same page as sort of what he wants to have happen in certain situations to sort of be able to anticipate, what's the best setup for me, all those type of things. And that's a trust thing. But like, if that all works out, the whole process is faster. Now, as the other part of that Watson sort of mentioned on this is like, because he had to do everything, he had to focus on everything. And by having to focus on everything, he knows the answer to everything. So like, if he has to set up a protection, if he has to set up where the run's going, if he has to pick out the mic, if he has to figure out the coverage and all this, he has now done all of these things and now knows what's going on. Whereas his work, he sort of alluded to the idea, well, if I'm only focused on this thing, maybe I'm missing details in here and I'm not as engaged. That's interesting because I'm curious to see if, they basically change up what he's focusing on and give him a different sort of pre-snap routine that sort of really has him focused on this. And then it becomes an advantage. That part of it's interesting. And that's why I found that conversation really interesting, because it really gets down deep into this. And like, that's the thing, like, even after the answer, Quincy Avery's like, yeah, like there's more specific rules with this being a West Coast system. Watson's never played in one, but it's going to let you be yourself and let you be a great player. Like this is the part that sort of got left out of these people, are sort of like grabbing onto these quotes of like somehow trying to make this bad or whether they just didn't know better, whatever it was. And it just gave a really interesting thought process because there's multiple ways to do things and be successful.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too is I think there's going to be a balance, right? Because to be fair, Kevin and Deshaun are still getting to know each other, coach and player. And not that I want to go back to Kevin Stefanski's first couple of years, and obviously has a completely different quarterback room overall, but I do feel like he was very much in control of making all of the decisions at that particular position, and that there wasn't a ton of trust necessarily between him and Baker, or that's the perception in just looking at things in hindsight. And I do feel like because Deshaun has obviously proven himself in this league and has played at a very high level and has been able to execute at a very high level, there should be some push pull, right? But there's got to be that mutual trust with each other, and that's probably going to take some time, and also just time and reps with his teammates that
Absolutely
he's still getting used to. I mean, I think from Kevin's point of view, I can understand wanting to have some level of control just because, again, Deshaun is still new to the offense. He's still getting his legs underneath him from being out of football for so long. But I would hope that we would see a lot of that transfer pretty quickly as the beginning of the season starts and they start to figure out their communication, their trust, the game planning. I mean, like, we can't forget that Deshaun wasn't allowed to be involved in any of this outside of training camp. And then he was gone from the team for the first 8 weeks.
Yes,
and then he came back to the building. Yeah. So again, it's going to take a little bit of a time. The good news is there's an entire offseason this year without the question mark of when he's going to be able to play and be involved.
And a week of extra practice because of the Hall of Fame game.
Oh, that's right.
The Browns have found themselves in. Joe Bitonio's worst nightmare realized that the Jets are going to play the Browns in the Hall of Fame game. The Jets have 2 Hall of Famers going in. The Browns obviously have Joe Thomas. Browns haven't had a Hall of Famer since Ozzie Newsome. It's going to be a huge deal. And for better, and I think in some ways worse, they will have an extra week of practice and an extra game. That's one of those where I wouldn't expect any of the starters to go anywhere near that game. At least at that point, I'd be questioning Kevin Stefanski if he does, but that may be beneficial from them to get, as much as the players are like, man, I lose a week, because that's all they are thinking. I lose a week of vacation essentially. But it may help them in that standpoint. And maybe the Browns can exercise at least some of their demons with the Jets.
Oh no.
So yeah, that was interesting. Now the other thing that I got a chuckle out of was when Quincy Avery asked Deshaun Watson if he likes Cleveland, because there's always two things that every athlete says when asked about this question. What are those 2 things?
What's your favorite restaurant?
Well, he did ask that. That was Quincy Avery, but it's always it always goes, no, I actually like Cleveland. That's always the start.
Yeah. Understood. Yeah.
And then
sorry, I misunderstood.
It immediately transitions to the food is great.
Yeah. Well, of course, because you can't talk about the weather. The weather's not great. So I understand why everybody defaults to food.
Well, it is nice that, athletes seem to think that Cleveland has.
There is really good food in restaurants in Cleveland.
Well, not
what else are you going to say?
But yes, but it is always funny. Like every time that an athlete gets asked about that, it's always, I actually like Cleveland and I really like the food. And then, yes, he did call out some, Quincy Avery did ask him about some,
well, he was, he was at the Marble Room. Was that a week ago they posted about us? He's here, right?
Yeah, he has moved.
He stuck around. Yeah.
That was his big declaration that, outside of, I mean, he's obviously still got family in Texas, and obviously he's going to have to go back there for some stuff. I don't know how much interest he has in sort of being there. I don't know, I'm not going to pretend. I think a lot of this for Deshaun is his dedication to what he wants to do here and really saying that like you could hear a little bit in that he's chomping at the bit, not just to work, but to start proving people that he's that guy, that everybody is saying he can't be or won't be or whatever. He wants to prove people wrong. I don't know if there's like some part of him he's just sort of like, Texas is done for me in some ways, and that this sort of gets him away from that. Who knows? But no, that's his big thing. And obviously, look, Kevin Stefanski's here. I'm curious, who knows how much they may be actually already at work on some of these things. But I mean, like Watson is still traveling around. Obviously, like they referenced that they were going to be somewhere where DeAndre Hopkins was going to be. And even the way he answered that was sort of like, he doesn't really believe it's realistic that DeAndre Hopkins could end up here, but he got the question. So it's interesting. But I thought overall the interview was interesting. I thought it was entertaining because he was comfortable. And he hasn't done anything like that to this point. And in this particular case, it was very in-depth in terms of football. Going back to the coaching staff thing, Van Pelt being the quarterback's coach is one part of it. Bill Musgrave is the other part. And a lot of people immediately sort of groaned because Musgrave was with Stefanski in 2013. And the feeling of, wow, they're just hiring another guy who does what he does. And Bill Musgrave has been a number of different places since then. And most recently, he was coaching at Cal as the offensive coordinator and quarterback coach. He's got 12 years of experience as an offensive coordinator in the NFL, 12 years experience as a quarterbacks coach in the NFL. And I went and watched his Cal offense, and there are absolutely some things in that offense where you go, oh, this is totally like some of the stuff the Browns do. But Cal stunk. Like, they were awful. Their best win was against Stanford. They beat Colorado, or they may have lost. Maybe they lost to Colorado. They lost every game of anyone worth a shit. But you watch that game, you're like, one, the quarterback is pretty good. He's very prepared. He's got lots of options to make plays, and he looks good a lot of the time. And you're watching this, and you're sitting going, and the receivers are open a lot. You watch that Notre Dame game, and they scared the hell out of Notre Dame. And obviously Notre Dame didn't have their finest year, and they won't ever until they join the Big Ten. Suck it. But you sit there and you watch and you go, okay, I love what I'm seeing in terms of passing concepts. Like, he's giving his guy a lot of answers. And the other part, they run a lot of spread stuff. There's a whole lot of empty formations. There's a whole lot of creativity in terms of formations to put pressure on defenses and all this other thing. And like I said, Cal is not good, but they give these teams problems. And you're sitting there going, I totally understand why he could be a benefit to the Browns and create specifically more passing help for this team. But the other part of that is because they do so much in terms of, like, I wouldn't characterize what they are as necessarily a spread offense, but they do a lot of spread out stuff. But when they run the ball, it's a lot of, like, the running back is just going against a light box and gaining a whole bunch of yards, which I think is ultimately what the Browns would like to have happen in a perfect world. There's no doubt there are going to be times where they, get tight splits and, put a bunch of heavier people on the field to try to move people off the ball. But I think ultimately the best thing they can possibly do is get a bunch of, viable threats with Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, David Njoku, and whoever else, David Bell, some of these other guys, if they step up, force the defense to cover all these guys and have Nick Chubb run against like two linebackers and just capitalize on that. So I was really impressed with what I saw with Musgrave, that, were there maybe other hires that they could have made that were better? Maybe. I continue to believe that if James Urban was available, it sounds like he must be staying in Baltimore, that they may have hired him. But I was very pleasantly surprised with what I saw from Musgrave. And I like the fact that he was at a college doing this, because it really allows you to, like, go nuts. And for the people who are, like, worried, well, the Browns are going to be like, just go get a bunch more tight ends or whatever. Their top three receivers, both years they were there, were all wide receivers. Like, they had a tight end one year who was okay, but he didn't get the ball. And then the second year, it's like all receivers and a running back that are catching passes. So, if you have it, I would certainly encourage people, you can get on YouTube and just look up Cal offense versus Notre Dame defense. It's a really interesting look at the way they put stress on opponents.
I will be adding that to my list, up and top of mock drafts, Pete. I'll get right on that.
Listen, you're changing, evolving. Your boy Cody Mock is getting ready to work out. Yeah. So look, that part of that's. Again, the coaching staff may not be done, and they did a lot of things that were like promotions from within. And like, I'd love to tell you what I think, that I would love to give you some in-depth answer what Ben Bloom is going to mean for the defensive line. I have no idea. He's the run game coordinator for the defense the past couple of years, and you could argue that he should be fired based on that because the Browns are so bad against the run. Or you could also look at it and go, my God, the personnel was so bad. I don't know the answer. Likewise, I the guy they promoted to corners coach and some of these other things, I have nothing to go off of that would tell me anything. The Browns like them enough to keep them around. They've done generally a pretty good job of being able to identify coaching talent within their ranks to the point where it is now getting them interviews elsewhere, as illustrated by Drew Petzing. But, this is the one area where Bree texted me and goes, is this good? And I'm like, it's good for Ben Bloom. I have no idea beyond that. And look, it's there's no question that defensive line coach is a huge job. Now, what I would say is that in the same way that Joe Woods is probably always going to be sort of, yes, he's worried about the whole defense, but he's probably going to creep back to the secondary a little bit because that's just where he is. That's sort of his baby. I suspect as much as Ben Bloom is going to be a defensive line coach, that Jim Schwartz is probably going to be having his eye there more than anywhere else. So maybe that alleviates some concerns, but ultimately I wish I had a better answer for you. I don't know.
Yeah, Pete wasn't lying when he texted me the news, and I was like, okay. I mean, I don't know, Pete. I really have nothing else to add to this commentary. Still nothing.
Yeah, it's tough. And that's the thing. Like, in the same way, Bree had asked me, was Bill Musgrave sort of on the radar? And
it feels like some of these are just come out of left field. I'm sure they haven't, because the staff particularly has plans for their plans for their plans. Know that these are very well thought out decisions that they're making. It feels like typically there's some noise about it in the media. I feel like our media actually does have a pretty good finger on the pulse when it comes to news and hirings. But yeah, these just kind of came out of nowhere.
And my reaction was once you get below coordinators, it's a little bit like the Wild West in some ways.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
I mean, in the same way that no one really saw Ephraim coming to coach safeties, in that way, it's sort of like you just don't know. But there are people who immediately jumped in my mentions were like, yeah, I had mentioned this as a real possibility for the reasons we mentioned. They've coached together before, and the Browns certainly, Kevin Stefanski, like a lot of coaches, likes to go back and sort of, there's a comfort level and all those things, and you can be critical of that in some ways, and if it doesn't work, it warrants it. But there are times where it is beneficial to bring in people that you can work with and have it, a similar thought process, and aren't a dick. You got to work with these people a whole lot of hours. You want to be able to stand them for that amount of time. But that's where I say, where I point at Musgrave and go, it's been 10 years. He's been a whole lot of different places and done a lot of different things. So we'll see where that shakes out. But ultimately, it's with a lot of these, your guess is as good as mine. Hope for the best. I mean, Jim Schwartz clearly involved in some of these decisions, even though he sort of obviously deferred and said, it's Kevin Stefanski's staff. I don't know what the conversation. It does sound, based on Andrew Berry's comments about Jim Schwartz and how he knew him from being with the Eagles, it does sound like it's a very, there's a lot of discussion that goes on between those groups, that it's, whether it's a consensus thing or whatever, that there is some sort of, an open discussion in terms of how they really want to do these things. And I would imagine that, when it went, if Andrew Berry and is involved in the conversation with, hiring Jim Schwartz, that I suspect Jim Schwartz and Kevin Stefanski and maybe Andrew Berry and some of these are people involved in these conversations of promoting Ben Bloom. But this is 3 years in a row where I've sit there going, Chris Kiffin was hired, fine. And then he took the job with his brother I was like, oh, this is a great opportunity. Somebody, you get somebody really good. Who wouldn't want to work with Myles Garrett? And then you start Chris Kiffin's back. And then this year it's Chris Kiffin is going to the Houston Texans, coach linebackers. Fine. Oh, we can get somebody really good. And then it's promoting Ben Bloom. So from that standpoint, I'm sort of like, okay, like it's underwhelming in that regard, but I don't have enough to go off of beyond that.
I think too, we just have to remember, at least for most casual fans, we typically don't hear about these coaches throughout the season, right? Like you hear about them now this time of year because they're making hires and there's a lot of turnover and change. But we typically never talk about them or hear them talk even when the season begins, which you never know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, right? Because you're exposed to the bigger names, the head coach, the coordinators, etc. But you typically don't hear from these parts of the staff, like they're behind the scenes, obviously working day in and day out with the rest of the staff. But it's hard to form an opinion about them based off of that. It's just like we don't actually know what they do or see them in action outside of, a couple of episodes on Building the Browns. So I have a hard time connecting with them or even figuring out if it's going to be a good or a bad hire.
True. And obviously now, whether it's Ben Bloom or some of these other guys, they will be on camera and hopefully better than some of the other guys from last year. It'll go better for them.
Get thrown to the wolves.
So yeah, that'll be interesting. But anyway, now we are at the combine and, beyond all the stuff that's going on with free agency and coaching staff, players are going to do some stuff in their spandex. Bree, who do you like for the combine? Who have you invested yourself into in the journey that is the combine?
Okay, so my investment goes from seeing one tweet about a guy I'd never heard of before in my life. How do you pronounce his last name?
I believe it's Mock.
Mock. Okay, Cody Mock. I saw his picture first on this particular tweet, and the tweet came from NFL Rookie Watch, which I don't actually follow that account, so someone must have liked this, and that's how I saw it. But whoever liked this, I'm very thankful for it because Cody Mock is exactly what you would think an offensive lineman should look like. Like he's like straight out of a movie, Pete. The long flowing hair, the gap tooth smile, so happy. And then I come to find out he was a 0-star recruit out of high school. He had 0 Division I offers. He walked on at North Dakota State, and I love him. I will be rooting for him during the combine.
Now, have you seen the picture of him when he showed up to where he is now?
No. Okay. It's not the one that was on this tweet. Is it a different one?
I mean, if it has it, it has it. But here, let's see if you get this, because it's hilarious how he showed up to this school versus where he is now. He showed up 6'5", 221, and he's now 6'6", 303. And he has gained a lot of.
So he was a tight end, and then he now is an offensive tackle.
Yes.
He has aged dramatically.
Yes. he went from he has gained a lot of things, weight and hair, down some teeth. But yeah, he looks like the stereotypical
2017 Cody Mock looks a little bit like Ken Carman.
Oh.
And I love Ken Carman, but like it looks like him in the face a little bit.
Well,
I'm gonna tag Ken in that.
You can. I don't know if he'll speak to you after that, but yeah.
Oh, come on. Ken has a good sense of humor.
This is true. And he may actually go, hey, it's been a while since I've seen 221.
Oh, Pete.
But yeah, so Cody Mock is certainly interesting. I don't know if he's somebody the Browns will be interested in.
No, we shouldn't be interested, but
yeah, Cody Mock is he's a guy that's sort of easy to root for. And they've played it up through the draft process.
Hey, Pete, in full transparency, I will not have an opinion until I actually start watching some of the combine drills. I like to go in without any bias. So I'm going to form some opinions on who I want the Browns to get by watching drills.
No, I know.
Hand measurement is a very important thing. Hand measurement. I need the verticals. I need the bench pressing stats. I need the 40 numbers. I need the cone drills. There's so much that I take away from this.
Well, I'm a big fan of the 3 cone. I wish they showed that as opposed to the 40, but I'm not going to win that one. But despite your sarcasm, I will. I look forward to hearing who you come.
No, I really do watch it. I'm just.
No, I know you do, but
I find it fascinating that it's like, oh, this guy's hand size is not what we expected. Therefore, it's gonna take him down on the draft board. And like, this guy's 40. Like, well, you came in at the. It just makes me laugh every single year of like how much weight is put into it. And I get it. Like, it is important. There are obviously measurables for all of this, but come on, you got to give these guys a little bit more credit. Like, there's a lot more than what goes into just these 3 days or 2 days, however many days they are competing at their particular positions. It's just, there's just so much like dramatics against it. And I just have to laugh a little bit. I mean, obviously the fact that it's televised and on NFL Network for 8 hours a day, like, tells you all you need to know.
Well, by the end of it, I fully expect producer Maddox will have made you time him and do everything else with these events.
Oh, my kids are so into it. I remember 3 years ago, we were watching it on a Sunday, and I like Rich Eisen. He's typically there doing the commentary or the, I guess, color analysis.
Yes.
And my kids were literally setting up their own cone drills and doing the drills, like rolling on the ground, getting up, doing the footwork and speed. So yeah, like, we're all about it. We're going to set up our own little combine at home. I may participate. I cannot afford to lose a hamstring or a knee, but I skied a week ago and I survived. So I feel like I'll be able to do this.
Well, if all else fails, you just blame the plantar fasciitis.
Listen,
but anyway, but that is all the more reason to listen next week. We will talk about some of the stuff that went on combine and guys that make sense for the Browns, but I don't want to prime the pump for Bree. I just want completely unfiltered,
yes,
honest
clean
reactions
slate going in,
and just let her cook and say, no, this is what the Browns are doing. I have declared based on watching this event or who you're invested. And I know I poke fun a little bit. No, I'm genuinely, it's always interesting because like, it's just a different animal and it does sort of, you can sort of get interested, even just like how some of the players are like, have fun with it or
yes.
What, show personality.
I get emotionally invested. Pete, I might even take notes this weekend. Just wait. I'm going to come to the show next week. I'm going to have notes from the combine. You're going to be so impressed with my preparation.
The transformation of Bree over the past like 6 weeks has been unbelievable. To just loving mock drafts, pumping me with questions all the time now. Like, she is totally invested. I love it. So tune in next week. That will be interesting to see. But yeah, before we go, do us a favor. Like us on, or subscribe to us on YouTube. That'll be our thing for the week. If you can do that, that would be a big help. And yeah, we'll be back next week. Hopefully, undoubtedly the Browns will wait. We'll see how production meetings go and the Browns will decide what they're going to release for us to talk about next week. But we look forward to it. Should be fun.